So let's hear now from Dr. Sally Penni MBE. Now, Sally is a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, the joint vice chair of the Association of Women Barristers, and the founder of Women in the Law UK. She's also an author and a podcaster, and her podcast, Talking Law, is regularly cited as one of the top law podcasts in the UK, and I've listened to several episodes recently, and they are excellent, and some very big names in there. Sally, I'm going to be fascinated to hear about your 3am conversations, but first of all, let's hear a bit about you, because I think I'm right in saying law doesn't run in the family, and you've no legal background in a family sense. So what was growing up like? Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me onto this brilliant podcast, and I'm glad it's not being recorded at 3 a.m.
Could be.
where I know often I'm still up prepping cases.
And we're going to talk about that. Yes.
So it's nice to be in the daytime. But no, I have no links in the family. There's no father or grandfather or anything who in law. My parents are medics who came to England to study, and I'm one of 5. None of us are lawyers. And the aim for me was to do medicine, at least a dentist. And growing up, we didn't really watch television. We read. We had Encyclopedia Britannicas. People my age probably remember those. Those leather-backed history books, if you like. Well, they just contain everything. I think the equivalent now is Wikipedia. But so we read a lot of those. And then I read Rumpole of the Bailey. And I didn't know what Rumpole looked like because I did in time watch, the John Mortimer books on television. And he was, an overweight, large white man. And I thought, yes, that is my role model. I love what he's doing. And so the path then for me, therefore, was not easy. I was very clever, but I didn't know anyone in law. Even work experience was quite hard to get.
Yeah.
You read a lot. I read a lot of letters asking for work experience. And then once you got work experience, you were then on the ladder. Then, of course, the pupillage that comes afterwards and so on. So, I have a very happy childhood. As I say, I'm the eldest of the 5, so I am quite bossy, although I think I should say that as assertive to my siblings there. But, a happy childhood, and Rumpole played a big part in my love of the law and the importance of, justice, access to justice, the rule of law, because actually those books are quite fascinating just reading them, but it was obvious to me, even reading those books, there was never a reference to anybody that looked like me being the advocate, for example.
I'm going to dob in my my co-host here, because would you believe that Joe has never seen or read any of the Rumpole series? And for the benefit of listeners, Rumpole was a 1970s TV drama about a criminal barrister played by Leo McKern.
Yes.
Books written by another doyen of the bar, John Mortimer QC.
Yes.
And Joanne's never seen or heard any of it.
Well, I may be an elder millennial, but I am a millennial, and it's totally outside of my cultural reference, I'm afraid. So, never seen it.
Well, I'm going to come back to fictional characters, because I have, as I say, listened to some of your podcasts, and you always put your guest on the spot over their fictional characters. So I'm going to do that later.
Peter, your turn's going to come. Don't ruin our podcast.
I'm going to hold you to that. Don't worry, I'm going to hold you to that. But perhaps more seriously, I watched Rumpole as well, and I read all the books, and it's my generation, really.
Yeah.
And I do remember watching Rumpole and thinking that I couldn't do that because I didn't feel that I was quick-witted enough on my feet. I didn't think I'd be in a position to conduct an argument with learned academic judges or what have you. What did you see in his character that led you to the bar as to perhaps one of the other branches of the legal profession?
Well, I because I read a lot, I quite like writing, and I quite like the advocacy part. Right. I mean, people see barristers, from your part of the profession, that you instruct barristers to be the advocates in court, and of course some of that's changed now with higher rights and so on. But I liked also the wit that he had, and it wasn't always Benny Hill type or Carry On type humour. Often it was witty, but quite sarcastic. If you're asked to translate for somebody because you're the only black woman in court, and everybody else in the dock are black from various parts of the world. Well, actually, my pidgin French isn't bad, but I can't translate just because we're the same color. And you can say that to a judge without offending them, but saying, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I can't help you. Why do you think that, somebody living in South Manchester can translate? On the other side, so I quite like that about Rumpole, even though the jokes or the quick-wittedness that he was making weren't quite like that. Although I never actually got into using that sort of conversation or replies in court, really, till, I'm 24 years court, 25 years court next year. It was only, way into sort of 20 years court that I might say something vaguely witty. I stored it up. But I liked the way that he could use both his voice and his prep. He was also always very well prepared. He was never caught
he
out.
did things properly, didn't
yes.
he? Yeah.
And that is when we talk about what makes a good advocate, I teach advocacy, for every new barristers, new pupil course and new practitioners course, compulsory course, every new barrister has to do. And they say, what's your best advice? Preparation, preparation, preparation. And that appealed to me.
Can I switch tack
a
little bit then? Because you've been awarded an MBE. And largely that's for services towards diversity, particularly in the law.
Yes.
You've almost touched on it in what we've said so far, but you must have seen certain obstacles. Could you talk a little bit about what you've seen? And also perhaps think about how far we've come as a profession in how things have evolved over the years and have changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's timely, really, because when I was applying for pupillage, which is the training part, the equivalent of a training contract for people going the solicitor's route, is different if it's apprentices and so on. I just didn't see black barristers, firstly. The first time I saw a black barrister, in real life, I mean, you would often read about them. There used to be a publication called Black Letter Law, and it contained largely solicitors. And I don't know how I came about it. It must have been in library or school libraries or something. But that had a list of sort of, black barristers in there. Some of them were counsel, so they were American. But the first time I saw a black barrister on her feet, and I've said this before actually, is a KC called Nesta Weeks. And she now actually regularly appears in Liverpool. She's from London. And it was because we were all being taught a Human Rights Act. This is probably showing my age, which was compulsory. And she came on to teach sort of my cohort of pupil barristers after lunch. So, everyone's eating too much and we're all a bit noisy and rowdy. And it was a compulsory course. And she walked on. She didn't have long hair or anything like me. She had quite a short sort of crew cut hair, greying, sort of very expensive red glasses, and very elegantly walked onto the stage, spoke into the mic, and there was deadly silence.
Yeah.
And we all thought, oh my God, who was that? I was thinking, oh my gosh, I want to look like her. Who is that? And she, commanded the stage and taught us. I mean, we knew most of it anyway, but the importance of what we needed to learn. And so that was the first time. I didn't even think I was in pupillage then. And because I'd never seen a black barrister or black solicitors, really, I didn't have a chip on my shoulder. But what I found was there was just few. And often when I went for interviews, it'd often be sort of me and somebody who didn't look like me, probably more like you, but maybe 6 foot tall or whatever. And so that was difficult and different. But what it did was it meant that I had to be twice as good as anybody else. And I do think, even though, when you look at some of the statistical evidence, times have changed. The entrance levels of sort of black and minority entering the profession is much better. I think social mobility and social class is a big factor. I think that's also much better, and I think it's also an area that we could all improve on. And also, neurodiversity, that was never really a thing in sort of my generation. I don't know about yours.
No, never
No
discussed.
one ever talked about people being autistic or, having anything. And often they bring a different thinking, don't they? Certainly to the boardroom and to our practices. So my barriers have been about getting in. And then, of course, once you're in and you're working sort of your bum off to be better than everybody else, because, if you make a mistake, people remember the person who doesn't look like everybody else rather than, just being part of it. And you can't afford to blag it either. You can't really afford to get caught and be asked a question and be going, not sure, just bear with me, or I just asked my solicitor. One can't. So they turned into, for me anyway, much more of a fuel to kind of, I couldn't afford to be a mediocre. And so the barriers were often about being good enough or being just as good or being better. Because my parents were very much like, you're a woman and you're black, so you do need to be much better. Which is why now it's funny when I see, the diverse range. In your firm, you've got a lot of women. You've got work to do in other areas.
I have the stats. I'm going to tell you.
Well, you tell me.
Well, no, I thought it was very interesting, and obviously I'm out of operational management now, so I was just reminding myself, and the SRA statistics, so Solicitors Regulation Authority statistics, would say that 37% of women are now the average in management positions, so senior positions. We're Hill Dickinson at 36.
Great.
And our ambition is to be 40% in senior positions by 2028. So that's on gender.
Yeah.
Women in the law generally, 53%.
Yeah.
The SRA would say it's 58% at Hill Dix. And we're also finding again that there are certain disciplines that seem to be attracting women.
Yes.
And
yes.
why that is, I don't know. But certainly Joe's discipline, family law, does. Our health sector sees a lot of women going in. So it has come a long way.
Yeah. And actually, what's great is recognizing that, it's come a long way.
There's a way to go.
And there's a way to go. No, it's true, because quite often people just say, oh, we're actually doing all right.
Yeah, we're not.
And then you think, you're not. And that's much more important, actually, for me, having the desire to say, we could be doing a bit better, and these are the ways that we're trying, or, especially at decision-making levels as well, because that's really important. Top down, great, having the bottom level, but having the pipeline to reach the top, I think is really, really crucial.
Well, that's where you get the benefit, I would think, and you've touched on it already, because that's where you get the diversity of thought process.
Absolutely.
That makes for better decisions.
Absolutely.
In the boardroom, effectively.
Yeah. And it's a big factor.
You obviously talk about the fact that you had to work so much harder to succeed. Do you think that's still the case?
No, gosh, I think millennials have got it totally different. Totally
Sally,
different.
we could be here all afternoon.
I know. People brewing beer so they can't be in on a Friday, doing triathlons so they can't. I mean, I think that's different now. I need to have a caveat, which is burning out and working all the hours isn't the answer. It's just the profession attracts that, and we need better balance. And, recent events in other law firms, deaths, people taking lives and so on, have shown that actually what I would say, the traditional way isn't always the answer. And I worked that hard just because I didn't know any better. My parents worked hard, and often the work ethic.
But didn't you do that partly because of your race, though, feeling that in comparison to the other people, you had to prove a point?
Yes, and I don't think we've kind of reached that yet. I mean, people say, if women can become mediocre lawyers or, just excel by just doing very little, then that would be okay. It means we've achieved equality because we're not feeling like we need to do that. But I do think we need better ways of working. I do think we need a balance. Some parts of me think that actually some of the trainees haven't had some of the hands-on, can I just run this by you? The water cooler, the court
learning by osmosis.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if that's the term for it.
That has become the term for it. Yeah, I think that's right.
I think they've really missed out on some of those because of the pandemic, and I think it's on each of us to try and rectify and teach that. So that doesn't mean everyone should be coming into offices 5 days a week. I'm not sure it's beneficial by way of productivity to have that. I think it's just as important to have people being productive but enjoying their families and family life, because that is the balance. Having children that you never see is completely pointless because it stores up all sorts of problems later on. And so I do think we need a better balance. I don't think burning the candle at both ends is necessarily the answer. I think we need a balance. I don't think we've achieved it yet, so don't ask me how I achieved
Well, I will ask you, because one of your we'll go out of order then, because one of your 3 a.m. conversations was about well-being.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that, first of all?
I think, I mean, when you're at work, you've got the mum guilt, right? So you're constantly thinking, what are my kids doing? What do they think of me? Because all you're doing is earning a living. I'm not sure that my husband is thinking the same thing at all, actually. I think he's probably thinking I'd love to go sailing, or, I'd like to go and play golf, whatever it is. And it's that mum guilt. So it's a constant at you. And then when you're at home, I try to be present. And that's the only way I can cope with my work. So whether it's sitting on the sofa eating popcorn and watching Flash, some awful DC comic thing that one of my sons is really into, and being engrossed in it and working out the plot or whatever, to, going out on long walks with our dog, with all the kids moaning that, it's too long or whatever. I need those in order to rebalance the working week. And also, quite often a lot of us have, although, if you have a son who's got an illness or somebody's you're a carer for somebody or whatever, that balance is required, because you can't do your day job properly if you're not fully balanced elsewhere. But I'm not saying I've got the balance. I just feel on a 3 a.m., that mum guilt is always there. So that is a 3 a.m. Part, a conversation in your head, worrying about them. And of course, when children get older, other things happen. When they're in secondary school, it's a whole different ball game. When they're young, they just need a few play dates, some toys. You need to keep them alive. It's great. As they get older, because somebody told me this and I was shocked and thought it was absolutely absurd, that, I thought, well, they can walk to school or get a school bus or whatever. No, they need much more. They need emotional conversations, a lot more going on, people being friends with this group and that group or whatever. And so that feeds into my 3 a.m., whether actually I am there around enough, or, I am offering a fullness of a well-being, not just for myself, but for the family. So that's one of my 3 a.m. And I don't care. I think men have it as well. They probably just don't talk about it.
Oh, I think men
as
do.
much as we do.
And I think, dare I say it, older men still have it. I hate to tell you, but my sons are in their 30s and it doesn't go away. You've got this for a long time to come.
Forever a parent, I think, is the thing, isn't it? I can see Joe nodding, so you probably feel the same.
I genuinely don't think I've ever spoken to a working woman who doesn't have that mum guilt and carry it around with them and be constantly the push and pull of trying to be great at their job and great as a mum. And I'm sure it applies equally to men, but certainly women I find, are becoming very open at talking about that and how difficult that challenge is.
Yes.
And I don't think any of us have the answer. That's the problem.
Well, there's the famous Sheryl Sandberg quote, isn't there? She was the CEO of Facebook.
Oh, yes, yes.
Who, was Superwoman, obviously, and incredibly successful. And she was asked in an interview I heard what her views were on work-life balance. She said, I don't believe in it. There's life, work it out. And clearly she did.
Yeah.
And came to the situation where she could run an incredibly successful business and have a life.
Yes.
And have, I can't remember how many children she had, but she had several. You got to work it out.
Exactly.
Do you think you've worked it out?
Oh, goodness, no. I mean, I don't have a stay-at-home husband. Like, if you look at the bar, quite a lot of successful women and solicitors' profession will say, yes, me and my husband made this decision that he would stay at home. No, we both work. So often it's kind of working out if one person's job is more important than the other. No, they're both equally as good. It's trying to allow for time when one's looking at balance, allow for the good times and the balance. So whether it's the holidays or the weekends away or just sport, sport. If you have kids who play sport, I don't know about you, mine play sport, you're literally passing in the night. So the days out tend to be more of an enjoyable thing for everybody. And also when kids have different activities as they get older, you kind of think, how did I ever manage this? Aside from childcare and all the rest of it, then you realise, oh no, now you're a taxi.
You become a chauffeur service.
Totally. And that's between me and my husband. So no, I don't have any answers. I don't think I've mastered it. I'm just trying to do the best that I can in each of those camps. And, and sometimes dropping balls. And now we don't have to go to school sports day anymore, much to my upset. But as my children have told me, you can't go and run in a suit and then run off back to court.
Run straight away.
Yeah. It's not allowed in secondary school.
Did that challenge, though, worrying about being a mum and, doing the day job, did that form part of your thinking when you set up the Women in Law organisation?
Yes.
It was that, because I feel like there must have been a springboard for that, a motivation behind it.
Yeah, it was, because I felt that most working mothers or carers, if I can put it like that, you go on maternity leave and you expect this wonderful thing, then you come back and then suddenly you think, oh, I've not really changed, apart from all the baby sickness and sleepless nights, but you're still the lawyer that you were. But what nobody tells you are some of the skills that you need to stay really good at your job and to progress. So I was thinking that about the Mother Guild. What if we can get coaches, Peter, I know you're a coach and a mentor, to actually teach us some of these skills through the webinars and the seminars, the events that Women in the Law hold. That was exactly one of the motivations, Joe. And also I wanted us to be slightly better connected. I mean, I know I say this a lot, and Joe, you know this, but I sometimes feel like we're all working in silos, and we as women and as lawyers, we need to be just a bit better at inspiring, supporting and connecting each other. And having environments where we can all thrive is really important. It's not about the day job. If you're not great at your day job, and I feel very passionately about this, then that's a competence issue, and you need to say it. If your work's not up to scratch, then you need to go on a course to up the work. I'm talking about something different, and we need to be honest about that. Sometimes people aren't great in their job, and there's a competency. Sometimes we're not keen to say it. I'm talking about the other stuff that comes from being a professional woman or professional person, and some of those are to do with juggling the home life, juggling, being on a board. I think women lawyers and men should be on board, on business boards. I think we've got fantastic skills that we can all bring. But we often don't know where to get the information. So when we wait till we retire, then somebody speaks to you about being on a board and you go, oh, yes, okay, and you can get a bit of pocket money too. Yes, thanks. But actually, in the currency of our work, I think it's really important, because often those boards can actually enable us to have skills we can bring into our profession.
Well, I was going to say, it is a two-way street, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can add value, I think. I agree with you entirely.
Absolutely.
But also we can evolve, we can learn.
Yes.
And bring those skills into our own practices or businesses, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. Can I move on to your second?
Oh, yeah, the 3 a.m.
conversation?
Oh, yes.
And it's a bit more tactical. And how you described it was strategic trial advocacy, crime and employment. Is that worrying about the day job?
It is a bit, and it is. And actually what I mean about that is I reflect on all my wins and losses. And I'm not sure anyone can be aware. Joe's nodding, so you obviously did the same thing. Yeah, it's true. It doesn't matter,
There's a scorebook. There is a scorebook.
Yes, there is. And it's not like, LA Law or something, or God forbid, Suits, that dreadful program. Well, it's good to an extent for entertaining, but that is not England, is it?
Give me LA Law any day.
Exactly. Take us back to LA Law. But I don't mean counting that. But what I mean is that actually reviewing what you did in that case that went well, and then thinking, okay, can I apply that to something else? Or another case, or where there are losses, try not to sort of lose endless sleep over it. Because I do that only from a learning point of view. I'm very much about an educational aspect to everything I do, whether it's books I'm writing or whatever the seminar or the webinar is. And so that constant learning, even from just an advocacy point of view, is important. And every case has to have a learning aspect. Otherwise, it's pointless for me. So I do have that. And then, and I don't think it goes away. I talk to a lot of KCs, and it doesn't go away the older you get. I thought, the more senior you become, you're in partnership, Joe, you've stepped down as CEO. People think, oh, you have sort of better night's sleep. I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think it comes with different challenges and different 3 a.m.
I think it does.
Conversations.
And I think also the benefit of experience actually makes it worse on occasions, because you're more likely to spot what you might not have got right.
Yes, yeah.
I think. Can I just put a twist on this as well? Because I notice your practice is very diverse, from crime, employment, all the way through to, you've written books on data protection, what have you. Does that inspire you, or is it more stressful the wider your practice is, and keeping on top of the law?
The law.
Yeah.
I would probably say it inspires me. But part of the reason I got into sort of slightly diverse practice was because when I came to the bar, we used to do things called common law pupillage. So one day you would be, 1 year's court in the magistrate's court dealing with in a drink driver or whatever, prosecuting you. The next day you were in like the mercantile courts. It's called something else now.
Yeah.
But the idea was that the ability as the advocate was good enough to be able to pick up in those areas. And then as time went on, of course, you just became a specialist in one area or two areas over others. But after I had children, I came back from maternity leave, I did find that I didn't get the cases that I used to do. I used to do like big, violent, serious cases, fraud. And then often the clerks would say, oh, of course, the children. And I'd be like, well, actually, no, if I have notice, I can go and do whatever the case is. And I'm not saying that that's the same for every chambers, every part of the country or whatever. But actually, oddly, they were probably thought they were doing me a favour. Or, you want to be near home. No. Well, anyone who's had children, as much as we all love our children, work is the only place you can go where nobody interrupts you when you're eating, when you're talking. People listen to you. Some aspects, you enter a room, people rise for you. So the notion that you suddenly didn't want to do that, but actually thinking, oh, it would help just to keep you local. No, with the big cases, because as we know for progression, and certainly in terms of gender, you need access to a larger kind of range of cases. So I actually I always did those areas. I probably did slightly more crime, but I felt that having had children, I wanted to have much more of an interest in the areas that I was particularly interested in. So, before I had children, I did a lot of maternity. And then after maternity, I did lots of, sex discrimination and a variety of other areas. And now I do a lot of menopausal cases. So I'm quite interested also in conducting cases that have an aspect in changing the law and the future. So even with the cybercrime stuff and so on, the online safety bill, I think it needs to have more teeth, but that's my own opinion. And so, I write a lot about that. So actually having a family has impacted some of my career choices in ways, or my leadership choices, if you like, in more ways than I thought. I never thought I would set up a women's organisation with 52,000 members. I mean, for goodness sake, people have done it and have done it better than me, but there's obviously something that, and there are men who are members, men who are carers and in the profession too. But I think that, my family life has affected my career, and using really negative experiences as positive, which is something I'm very much about. But I do think that the areas that I'm interested in are now changing. I quite like, I don't like to be stuck in the mud. I don't know about you, but...
No, I agree.
Yeah, I like to change with the times, if you like.
No, I can see that. That's inspiring to you, isn't it? All of that diversity of approach and background.
Exactly. Not just the obvious diversities. I talk a lot about the obvious diversities, but in fact, it's important to look at the other ranges of diversity and indeed diversity of thought.
What I think is really fascinating when you talk about some of the challenges that you faced is that you don't seem to have a chip on your shoulder. You don't seem to be angry about that. And I think in some respects it would be justifiable when you've been mistaken for a defendant just because of the colour of your skin to actually feel very angry about those things happening. But you seem to have been able to channel it in really positive ways, which I think's fascinating that you've managed to do that. Is that something of a real conscious choice, or is that just your nature?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think it's Martin Luther King who said, I'm sticking with love because hate is too much hard work or something. And it's a quote that I used when I did a TED talk. I think that we need the majority to bring change. And often when people share the awful experiences, one has to think about what was the purpose and what impact do you want to. I can tell you about all the incidents of racism I've had. This podcast isn't long enough to account for it. All the incidents professionally, the type of cases that I've conducted just because I'm a black woman or whatever. whatever. But to what purpose? What we need to do is find the learnings from lots of the awful experiences. So one of the things that encouraged me when we were in the pandemic, in the sense that after the death of George Floyd, which was a horrible, horrible, murder and awful death, because it was quite invasive. We were all stuck in our homes, and yet this occurred, and it felt even more invasive because it was played on the news repeatedly. So it felt like actually suddenly this was in our homes, and then it was a catalyst for all of us to look at ourselves and our practices to see what is happening on race and so on. What I found encouraging was the people who were out protesting weren't just sort of the typical people you would expect, maybe the brown and black people, like in the American civil rights, people protesting there were certain groups. Actually, it was white people, normal people, people's grannies, young people who were white and whatever the obvious diversities were, who were saying, no, this isn't right, and we need to, build back better, which was a term we used a lot. And I was really encouraged by that, because if we need to have the factual incidents of the negativity and the awful incidents, but we need to learn from it, because for me, otherwise it's completely pointless sharing awful experiences, because you're just triggering a trauma that's not really progressed or indeed moved on. So I suppose maybe it is a conscious choice to try and have a learning from that, and to think, oh, well, actually, maybe we can do that. Because otherwise, just having narrative after narrative after narrative of incidents of racism or misogyny or sexism doesn't do anything. It doesn't, for me, it doesn't improve. So we need to think, okay, we know there's a lack of progression in gender. When I set up Women in Law, for example, but we know that nobody's keen on quotas, so we can't really implement that. But we can think about progression in other ways, which isn't just upwards. Progression can be linear. Often we think about just going up. Sometimes it's actually going sideways for a bit until you can go up. I try to use the negative stuff because, quite frankly, I think I would then just be overcome by the sheer awfulness, And there's still stuff goes on. I mean, in 14 years, there's only been a 1% increase of black women judges in the judiciary.
Yeah.
There are no black full-time judges in the Supreme Court or in the High Court and indeed in the Court of Appeal. And there's a long way to go, but there are lots of other areas which are improving. So that could become actually the headline, but it's not, because it's important for us to recognize where we have improvement. The tribunals have a great deal of obvious diversities and people with protected characteristics there. So we've got to celebrate that, as well as saying, okay, but at the top, we are lacking. So how do we try and make the leap from the ends where there's an overpopulation of appointments to the areas where they're lacking? That's much more meaningful than just saying, well, these are the statistical evidence and that's it, the lack of black partners. Okay, but how are we going to move up? So generally, that's my own narrative and that's how I kind of deal with the work that I do, if you like.
Let's move on to the final 3 a.m. conversation.
Okay.
And it's about career progression.
Yeah.
And what's next, because you've done an awful lot.
I haven't. I'm so young. Obviously, I started my career at
for someone
12.
so young, you've done an awful lot.
I'm channeling myself on Taylor Swift. That's why I'm
Well,
not
let
French.
me twist the question at you then, because what next? Who knows? And maybe you'll tell us. But our last guest, Andy Grant, who was a ex-Marine commando amputee, he was describing how many of his friends in their 40s, 50s, 60s, very successful, still hadn't really worked out what their purpose was.
Yes.
You touched on it slightly a minute ago. Do you think you've worked out what your purpose is?
Oh, goodness, no. And I suppose that is a 3 a.m. conversation. I'm friends with lots of high-achieving people. Joe, you're one of them. People who are really big, women and men, high achievers in various different veins. I don't just mean financially. No. But, quite a lot of cases, judges, in the legal profession and then outside of the legal profession. And so my 3 a.m. is often thinking, oh yeah, well, what is next? I don't really think I've achieved that much. My kind of what's next or my purpose is really, and it's probably a bit cheesy, but it's the truth, is to raise happy, healthy children.
Nothing wrong with that.
And everything else is kind of extra. You know, obviously doing my day job and not being struck off by anybody is a given, and making sure that, you know, the knowledge aspect. But I do think about things like purpose, because, you know, I'm not envious. I don't look at people and think, oh, look what they've achieved. But I do always think, oh yeah, well, what is supposed to be next? And often when I get my better ideas, if you like, whether it's a cross-examination question or an idea for a book, it is often when I'm in that well-being space, whether it's camping in the field or whatever. You know, you're in a cottage where it's raining outside and it's like the umpteenth board game with the children or a big jigsaw. And if I don't have that, then I go back to thinking about, well, what is next? What is the purpose? What will I do? But ultimately, it is, you know, one of my kids has been poorly when he was quite young, and so having healthy, as I say, healthy, happy children as a family unit is really important to me, because I think family first. And I wasn't always like that. I think before I had children, you know, I would work my backside off, and I still do that now, but not to that extent, because you have got little people there. I remember sending a fax once to, I don't know if it was the Court of Appeal or the High Court, and one of my sons, I've got 2 sons and a daughter, kept trying to come in to play with me. And the fax, I mean, young people won't know what fax is.
No.
You know? And it wouldn't go through. And I don't think it was school holidays, but I needed to get it in before the deadline. It wasn't even like the day before the deadline. I just liked to be ahead. And I remember being so cross with him because all he wanted was a cuddle. And I just thought, oh my God, what's life resorted to? And it's because I was basically faxing the skeleton argument, and it kept jamming at like page 18 or whatever. And it's before emails were what they are now. So yes, whilst that sounds cheesy as to purpose and really what I'd like to achieve, I'd like to think I've made a very tiny impact. I think they call it a ripple effect in whether it's our profession or indeed in people's lives that I've touched. Ever so tiny. And if I've made a tiny impact, then great. You know, if someone's listened to the podcast and decided they'd like to be an apprentice and follow the apprenticeship, whatever it is, and enter the law or do an aspect of the law where, you know, funding isn't as available or whatever, then that's a tiny bit of impact. And if women have stayed in the profession, because one of the reasons I set up Women in the Law UK was because I got fed up with women leaving the profession because the workplace just couldn't accommodate you know, work and caring responsibilities. So I suppose I sort of answered that question that, yes, I want happy, healthy children and family first. But I'd just like to think, you know, as a purpose, my 3 a.m., am I making a small dent in people's lives, in however tiny, to make an improvement? It might just be inspiring them to run a 10K and, you know, raise money for a charity that never gets anything, or a workplace choosing a charity as the charity of the year or something for a cause they've never heard of. And I'm sure the management people, you know, and the coaches, the gurus like you will have some clever word for that type of leadership or so on. But that's what I would like to be. I don't see in our profession leadership just being CEO, KC, and so on. I think it's so much more than that. And I think it's a wider, and I think we need to embrace it. It's not just.
Totally agree with you. It's about being a role model, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I don't think I am, but I think it's
I
much
might
more.
beg to differ on that,
much
but
more
I get
than.
it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say I dare to disagree with you, Sally, when you say I don't think I've achieved much, because as a woman working in the law, I would say that you've made a huge impact with your books, your podcasts, the Women in Law. So don't do yourself a disservice.
Oh, that's. I'm gonna cry. God, this is gonna ruin my hardened image.
Before that happens,
Okay.
Before we wrap up, I've got to get the profession's own back on you.
Okay.
Because as I said earlier, you always ask the guests on your podcast, you know, what's your favourite fictional legal character. So you can't choose Rumpole. That was your inspirational
Yes.
character. So what's your favourite? It can be books, it can be TV, it can be films.
Gosh, I'd probably need a few. Gosh, I'm
Go on
thinking.
then, a few. Battle them off.
Well, LA Law, which I always
Arlie Becker?
loved. Well, I don't want to pick. Recently I've been thinking about Erin Brockovich.
Okay, yeah.
And nobody ever says Erin Brockovich.
No.
I don't know why, because she was never quite a lawyer, but she used the law. But Albert Finney in that film, I know you said he can't be a man, but theoretically, I thought he was so brilliant as a sort of elderly statesman working with this woman who was able to engage with people and bring down, because I quite like this sort of films. But yeah, so Ally McBeal, Erin Brockovich, Albert Finney. But I suppose there are many black lawyers. There is a lawyer from Suits whose name escapes me, who works with them all, and then she goes off.
Yeah, the managing partner.
The managing partner, but she doesn't ever seem to do any real law. She just wears sort of nice designer.
Partners. We don't.
This is obviously where this is the aspiration, Joe. Joe's laughing. Forget being, a kick-ass family lawyer, Joe. You need to just wear nice suits and not do any more
Put
law.
heels up on the desk.
Yes,
and
heels
read
on the
paper.
desk. Whiskies in the evening. There is a lawyer in a film, in a series called How to Get Away with Murder.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and the character is played by Viola Davis, the American actress, who I like enormously.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, both of you. They're very testing questions, and I can't wait to hear it.
Good.